Good evening. Welcome back to the TRM Parent Parsha series, Parsha Vayetzi. This week's parenting tip was inspired actually from the learning of the daf. It was actually today's Wednesday, so it was yesterday's daf. We just started Gemara Psachim, and on the top of daf Gimel Amud Bet, there is a discussion, as the Gemaras want to do, that is a slight tangent, but somehow related to the overall topic. But the point is so small, it takes up just 2 lines in the Gemara, but it was so salient. And as Eitan and I were learning it together, we both looked at each other and we kind of like nodded and was like, this is so brilliant and so important. And so I want to share it with you. It wasn't mentioned as a parenting tip, but like all good things, it can always be applied to our daily lives and the way in which we engage with other people, the way in which we engage with our children. And with people in general. And so Rav Huna says in the name of Rav that when you're teaching your students, you should do it in a way that is short and concise. And what Rav Rasner, whose daf we were listening to, was going on to explain is that, anything that you can't say in a few words, you probably shouldn't say. And the idea is that less is more. And sometimes we forget that and we go into a long-winded thing, sometimes because we love it, sometimes because we're confused ourselves, sometimes because we get lost in our own rabbit hole and we have so many things to say or we haven't totally thought it out. But when we take a pause and we ask ourselves, wait a second, could we have said that in shorter? Or did it get lost by the time I spoke so much and said so many things and went into a million different loopholes? Was I actually able to communicate the idea in a salient, thoughtful way to the person who's listening? And it made me think of parenting because I think sometimes as parents, we get hijacked. We get an idea in our head, whether it's with a young child, maybe a middle school child, an adult child, a high school age kid, and we start going. We just full speed ahead. We have an idea in our head and we're just talking to them. And I think if we're conscious, we'll notice that after a few minutes, they glaze over. It's too much information. They can't take it. It's too much. What we're saying is now starting to become background noise and chatter. And I think this oftentimes happens when we're getting frustrated with kids. I one time heard a wonderful lecture from Dr. Shoshana Dax, who's the ELC psychologist, and she was reminding and all of us parents that when we're having a moment and we're really frustrated with our kids, the worst thing we can do is start lecturing them in that moment. They're so unavailable. They're just their brains are freaking out. And so the same way that when they're screaming and tantruming, we're kind of just hearing blah, 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 blah. When we start lecturing them in those moments when their brains are totally hijacked, all they're hearing is blah, 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 blah. And so really thinking about how to pause and use less is more with kids in a way that's meaningful, important, salient, and lets the message come through. And sometimes we have to pause to do that. Sharon Richter recently said, if you're frustrated and overwhelmed and your kids are driving you up a wall, because that's happened to nobody, instead of losing it, which we're all want to do from time to time, maybe just don't say anything, just back away, and then come back and have one salient piece that we're able to communicate that is thoughtful and that is the kid is available to hear it. And part of being available to hear it is knowing what each child's bandwidth is to hear the information that you're passing them on to. We think about that also often in terms of our own Shabbat table. Sometimes we let a conversation go on too long and you see everyone start to glaze over and we're like, okay, check. Time to end it. So I think that always kind of reminding ourselves, sometimes our inclination is more is better, but sometimes less is better. It allows the thought to be clear, concise, and in the words of kids or teenagers, we get it, and kind of moving on. But it made me also think about something else. I had the good fortune to listen to Rav Golvich. Rav Golvich gave this past week's Midrash Yom Rishon and Kolel Yom Rishon. It's on Sunday mornings. I recommend the full shiur for everybody because there were a lot of moving pieces and trying to follow my own advice from the Gemara. I just want to bring one short piece that he brought up that I thought was really interesting and important. He talks about the fact that when Yaakov Avinu is running away, right? We pick up the story in the middle of the drama. Yaakov is running away from Esav. He's been given this these two brachot from his father Yitzchak, and Rivka and Yitzchak have given him these instructions to travel to Lavan and to seemingly do something, right? Start over, protect himself, live. But it seems that he's almost unclear as to what his charge is, what his mission is. Maybe it was clear what Abraham's mission was and what's clear what Yitzchak's mission is. But now Yaakov is doing something his father didn't do. He's leaving Eretz Yisrael to go to another land. So that's already different than the message that was before. And he finds himself falling asleep, right? We know the famous story that he gathers, the Pasukim say that he gathers the stones of Eikach Ma'avnei HaMakom and he puts them underneath his head, and he has a dream, and in the dream Hashem gives him a bracha that he's going to have a lot of children, and he's going to have a very large family. And then when he wakes up in the morning, he says, "Ma nara hamakom hazeh ki im zeh beit Elokim v'zeh sha'ar shamayim." He doesn't say all that, right? So at least that's at the end. And then he takes that stone and he places it, that was under his head, right? So it goes from being avnei, multiple stones, to even, one stone, which is a source of much of Rashi's commentary, and the Chizkuni picks up on it as well, in terms of what transpired, that it was an even and multiple stones to one stone. And then he does something where he takes it and he makes a matzeva. And I think it's interesting to note, if you look down in the Psukim, particularly the Ramban points out for us that a matzeva is one stone. It's one stone. A lot of times it involves some type of pouring of libation, which is in fact what he does, which is in contrast to a mizbeach. Mizbeach is multiple stones that you pile one on top of the other. And interestingly, the Ramban brings to our attention the fact that a matzeva is going to be something that is forbidden for the Jewish people to build. It's going to be a symbol of idol worship. It's going to be a representation of idol worship, and it's going to be asur. And so what Yaakov actually has built, this matzeva, is actually something that is forbidden. And it's interesting to think about what's going on here. What is one stone, and why is one stone bad, but maybe not in this context? What is it trying to teach Yaakov? What's the transformation? Because we know if we look in the next psukim later on in history, when Yaakov is coming back after with his whole family, after he has made peace with Esav, so he goes back to the same place, which is now referred to as Beit El, and he builds a mizbeach, not a matzeva. Now he builds a mizbeach, lots of different stones on top of each other. So what is the meaning behind lots of different stones? Why is a big stone not necessarily something that we ascribe to in our religion, but putting stone upon stones is a place where we can offer korbanot to Hashem, and is the center point of our avodah, and thinking about the fact that this location is the source of the world, right? They talk about this idea that maybe this stone is the Evan Shatia that from the earth came through. So what is it about it? And Rav Goldvecht, I think beautifully, talks about the fact that in our world, in Judaism, people don't just talk about their father and their grandfather, and if they're lucky, their great-grandfather, which is how most of the world holds their memories. They don't know stories beyond their great-grandfather. But in our world and in our culture, family and history is deep and rich and meaningful. People talk about their lineage of kahuna. People talk about their connection to different gedolim that they can relate to, whether it's, I'm a descendant of Rashi, and I connect back to Rabbeinu Tam, or the Vilna Gaon, or the Brisker Rebbe, whatever it is that is meaningful for different people, the Rambam family. And we think about the fact that all of these pieces are about making connections, and about the fact that we hold family and building family to be in high ideal and esteem. And I think that one of the questions that Yaakov had was, what is my mission? And in taking this idea of an Even, that he ended up with, right? So he was lost and he wasn't sure what that was going to look like. He was feeling a sense of scatter, right? And it becomes one stone. The Midrashim have almost like a debate about that there seemed to be a battle going on between the stones about whose head he was going to lie under. But I think the other piece of it that the Chizkuni picks up on is the fact that everyone had a mission, and he was trying to figure out what his mission was, and that this stone, potentially the different pieces of the stone, were part of Yitzchak's being wrapped on when he was offered up almost as a korban by his father, that Yaakov's not clear what his mission is. And then Hashem reminds him that your mission is so different from everybody else's mission. Your mission is to turn the Yechidim, the individual members of Yahadut, into a community, into a tribe, into a people. And in fact, that's what happens. He leaves as an individual. He puts a matzeva, but that's not who we are. Who we are is our heritage, and connecting to it and having a sense of gratitude for the people who have come before us, the work that they've done, connecting to it, trying to build upon it as he really does, and expanding it and trying to work to maintain his family, which was a struggle for Yaakov, as we will see in the upcoming Parshiot, but something that he's committed to, and ultimately successful, as we know his children come back as a collective to bury him per his wishes in Eretz Yisrael. And I think that it's such a powerful imagery that he then comes back and builds stone upon stone upon stone, because that's who we are. And that's what he built. He had a sense of Hakarat HaTov. The Mefarshim say when he came back to it, he made the bracha Shasali Nes B'Makom Hazeh, right? That he did this miracle for him, not just the miracle perhaps of saving him, but the miracle of helping him find his way to have and to set him on a mission that he was able to create, which is stone upon stone and family upon family. And so I think that this idea of family and who family is, who's our bigger family, what's your favorite family memory, favorite family story. I know I come from a Sephardi family, and I also have one grandparent who was a survivor of the Holocaust, and Eitan, my husband, who does not have any Holocaust survivors in his family, always kind of found it interesting that in his family, people didn't talk about the Holocaust, but in my family, all you had to do is sit at a Shabbat table for just a little bit. And somehow, even if my grandfather wasn't present, people were talking about the Holocaust, right? So some good stories, even in the Holocaust, and some sadder ones. But I think this idea of who family is, who are the people that we're resting upon, this idea that we're living upon other people's shoulders of giants. And I think that being able to take a step back sometimes, which is hard to do, but when we look at the history, when we look at the generation, we're able to have a great sense of Thanksgiving as we're coming up on the Thanksgiving holiday, a sense of gratitude, and really trying to inculcate the values of family, and sharing it in a meaningful, salient way that allows our children to find meaning in it. Parsha Treats. Okay, so I think there's lots of fun things you could do in this week's Parsha. So sheep, right? There's a whole matzav that happens with Yaakov and Lavan and the sheep and the spotted and this. So you could have fun with it. We'll see how ours come out. One year I did ladder cupcakes, and I think I did bears for Yaakov, and he is resting on some type of, I don't know what he's resting on, maybe an Oreo or something like that as the one rock. I love the one in the corner that has all the rocks and the ladders going up. I'm going to try a challah ladder. I'll keep you posted on how it goes. I'm also thinking about doing flour cookies for the dudaim, right? So there's a lot of children in this week's Parsha also, hence the little baby cake pops. They look so much harder than they are. I love cake pops because you could just take a Duncan Hines recipe, a cake recipe, mix it together with some frosting, and then melt chocolate and roll them in, and you can just do fun things with it. It doesn't have to look exactly like a baby. You could throw hearts on it. Okay, the piñata cupcakes are so fun because I was thinking about this idea of a surprise. That Yaakov thought he was marrying Rachel, and lo and behold, surprise, he married Leah. So thinking about all the different ways that we can do surprises. Tina Samter sent me these two with little clues on them. I love this ladder because it involves no baking whatsoever, and it can be done on Shabbat and then eaten on Shabbat. And what did Yaakov remove from the well? So that's also just fun and easy. You can really play with it and just kind of make it your own. I think that as you get a little bit deeper into some of these parshiot, there are other places to go with it that can be really fun. And it doesn't have to perfectly line up exactly with what you're thinking. I was trying to think of a way to include some fun thing with the idea of simanim, right? I happen to personally love this midrash that is so famous, where we know that Rachel and Yaakov had these simanim. They thought Lavan was going to trick them, and then that Rachel in such a heroic way, in a sense of deep sensitivity for her sister, gave her sister the simanim. And so really speaking to the power of the personality of Rachel. So I was trying to think of a way to like incorporate like simanim and signs and what that would look like. I couldn't come up with something, but I haven't given up hope yet. We'll see what comes out. And I also think you can really like incorporate wonderful Thanksgiving things. There's the fun Thanksgiving cupcakes, and thinking about this idea of gratitude, and a sense of hoda'ah and gratitude for our families and the people who've come before us, and what we've been able to build upon them. And it being it's an American ideal, but it's also a very deep Jewish ideal. So Shabbat Shalom, happy Thanksgiving, and I hope everybody has a great Shabbat and weekend.